This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Kendra Dahlstrom. She is a transformational executive coach, keynote speaker, and the host of the Unworthy Leader podcast. With over 2 decades of experience guiding senior executives at Amazon, VMware, and other Fortune 50 companies, Kendra helps high-achieving leaders stop performing and start leading from a place of presence, clarity, and power. Her work is rooted in the belief that imposter thoughts, self-doubt, and vulnerability aren't weaknesses, they're data. Through her signature frameworks, your doubt is your data, your failure is your fuel, and your vulnerability is viral, Kendra has helped hundreds of leaders turn silent suffering into strategic clarity. She brings a proven, bulletproof process that demystifies what's really happening behind the leadership mask. Her insights include the 2 hidden brand liabilities affecting executive presence, 6 revelations about imposter thoughts, and her proprietary 4-step framework to transform inner conflict into action, challenge conventional leadership models, and unlock a more human, sustainable approach to influence. Kendra doesn't just talk about authentic leadership, she lives it. This isn't theory. It's lived truth, earned insight, and a revolution in how leadership gets done well. So, Kendra, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today.
It's great to be here, Steve. Thanks for having me.
So, why don't you give us just a little context here to start with? We heard some things about you, obviously, in the bio, but tell us a little bit about where you grew up and kind of what your early passions were and influences, and how you got to the executive coaching role that you're in now.
Great question. So I'm originally from Northern California, the Bay Area, born and raised, was led to college at the University of Arizona because at the time my major was nutrition and exercise science. I wanted to be an athletic trainer for ideally NCAA teams, but was hoping to do it for professional teams one day.
Yeah.
And that changed while I was in college. It was before the WNBA was out and about, and we saw a lot of diversity in some of those roles. And the woman that I was working for at the time was the highest ranked female in all of athletics, highest ranked female athletic trainer. And so I started to kind of see the writing on the wall, and decided I wanted to go into consumer psychology and studies. And so went down that path. And that really led me into working on for high-tech companies in the Bay Area, really trying to understand not only consumer behavior, but internal employee behavior. And that led me down a path of learning about change management, program management, and was eventually voluntold to lead mergers and acquisitions and do merger acquisition work, really trying to understand the nuances of human behavior and what drive change and how we can help people be at their best. At that time, I was also working with my own executive coach and found that a lot of the strategies, tools, and tactics that I was learning were really helpful to my leaders, especially during merger acquisitions, because it's such a tenuous time. So I realized I really like this work. They're coming to me for advice. I enjoy helping people uncover blind spots and learn how to be their best self and how they can show up at their best, which benefits them in their career as well as their personal lives. And so that it wasn't really until 2020 that I actually made the full transition from operating as a quasi executive advisor coach into a full-time leadership development coaching role in an HR function.
Yeah,
For a Fortune 50 company. And have been doing that since, and really enjoy the work of helping high achievers really relieve themselves from this chronic pressure that they put themselves under that I believe gets in the way of their own clarity, their ability to show up authentically in their personal lives as well as their professional lives, and help detach them from achievement equaling fulfillment, because many of us get caught into that trap. And that was my lived experience. So that's what I do today.
Yeah. What a great example of how you go into something thinking that you want to do something, or maybe pressured to think, what am I going to do in my life? And then it changes and it just goes in a different way. I'm a physical therapist myself, and then I became a CEO. So, if you would have told me that when I was treating patients that I'd be the CEO of a pretty large company, I would have thought you were crazy. So sometimes these journeys and these paths that we take just go in different directions. Although we still grab from those early years and influences and things that we do. So, very interesting story. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, and just one point on that I'd like to call out that you alluded to, Steve, is that I think it's more about skills transfer, and I don't think the workplaces look at that enough these days. They look at just hardcore resumes and say, "Oh, this is the data. He did physical therapy here. He can do physical therapy here." And I think we really need to start looking more at skills transfer. So if I was to do an assessment on skills transfer of an exercise scientist or an athletic trainer and what I do today, it's really not that much different. It's just whether I'm working with the physical body or the mind. I'm still just doing deep listening, understanding, trying to help solve problems, show up as a servant leader to help lead people to be their best. It's just, am I doing it with the mind or the physical body? So I think when we start to look at like that, for me, when you say physical therapist to CEO, I'm like, oh, I bet there's a lot of really interesting skills transferred there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the message to especially younger professionals is you don't have to have it all figured out. Sometimes you just need to move forward and do what you like and what your passion brings you to, and you can't predict or you don't know where that's going to end up. You just look for opportunities to keep going forward and embrace them, and it's too hard to predict what your full career is going to be at an early stage for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, I got to say, growing up in Northern California and now living in somewhat, I guess you'd call it rural Tennessee, that's got to be a big change. How do you do that? What is it, I mean, culturally and all the
Yeah.
things involved with that?
Yeah, well, it wasn't as much a change. I'd been in the Bay Area and then we had moved to the Central Valley, which is the large, agriculture farming area in
Right.
California. So moving from there to here is pretty similar in terms of landscape, um, people, occupations, economy, those kinds of things. That wasn't that big of a change. I will say the biggest change was pace coming out here.
Hmm.
And it's been a welcome pace for me
Yeah.
as someone who's a type A, who's always worked in high tech companies. I've always been a high achiever. I could use a little bit of type B personality influence. And so
Yeah.
for me, it was very much a welcome change. The one thing I always joked about, and of course, this is generalizing. So apologies if this offends anybody, but the one truth I found very common in California in particular was that people would often say, "How are you?" But we're so on the go and busy that we just keep walking. We rarely stop and actually listen and hear the answer.
Yeah.
We just expect like a quick, "Oh, great," and keep walking, or not an answer at all. And here, when people ask how you are, they will stop and talk to you for 15 minutes. And so
Yeah.
Southern hospitality is legitimate,
Yeah.
and that can definitely slow your day down, but it's earnest and it's welcome.
So tell us a little bit about you have a podcast
Yeah.
called The Unworthy Leader, which I thought was an interesting title. So tell us
Yeah.
why it's called that and what are you trying to do with your podcast listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a title that created a visceral reaction in me, a little bit of a like a gut wrenching, like, well, I don't relate to that. But then there was part of me that was curious about it. And so I really wanted to create that same reaction for the listeners because I figured people would either think, oh, that's stupid, I'm not going to listen, which is fine. It's not your podcast. Or people would be curious and be like, well, I wonder what that's about. And there are times I feel unworthy, or this sounds like this might be for me. And so I really wanted to draw in, the 10% of people who would get value from it. I'm not necessarily looking to scale. I'm looking for value and impact. And so the story behind it was that I come from a pretty deep toxic family systems and trauma that lasted decades. And so in my own undoing of that work and going through therapy for years and doing somatic work and doing um, NLP and just doing all these healing remedies and personal work, I realized that I really wanted to speak to this essence of unworthiness that I feel like drives a lot of our challenges today. I see it in the corporate workplace all the time. I believe it often can be the root cause of high achievers, chronic achievement and wanting to succeed but never feeling fulfilled. It can be the root cause of obviously sometimes mental health issues and or just relationship problems and identity of self and value of self and depression and anxiety and all these things that I know I had dealt with over the years. So I really wanted to tackle it from that perspective and speaking to the root cause and really just unveiling truths and talking about it in terms of raw truths and normalizing this idea that we all have feelings of unworthiness or doubt or imposter syndrome or whatever word you relate to most. We all have that at some point in our lives. And I want to help normalize that conversation so that people don't feel so isolated when they have that, especially in leadership, because I think the higher up you get, the harder it is to be able to openly admit those things, and the lonelier it can be, the more isolating it can feel.
It's really interesting you say that. I myself, I've often said, and people think I'm toying with them, but it's true. You know, I look at myself sometimes as a reluctant leader. It's not something that I went out and said, okay, I got to be the CEO. I've got to be the leader. I want to be the team captain. I've got to do this. It's just more that I did what I did, whatever that is, and somehow that resonates with people. And then it's almost like I get pushed or maybe challenged or asked to go in a leadership role. And then when I get in it, I love it. But it's not something that I'm just driven to do. So sometimes, like you said, we all think, you know, like, what am I doing here? You know, but yet people respond well to the personal traits that good leaders have and they want to be around. And so, you know, like I said, sometimes I think of myself as a reluctant leader.
I like that terminology. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit too about you know you said in the bio, and then it's an interesting quote. It says you want to help achievers stop performing and start leading
Mm.
from presence, not pressure. So explain that theory a little bit, and what do you see when you make that statement?
Yeah, I believe that when we're motivated by fear, and fear is the underlying root cause, whether we see it as that or not, we are working to perform at all costs. And so that could look like being in a meeting or a boardroom and needing to perform so that you can get that next promotion or you can get that next annual review or bonus or maybe just that accolade or recognition, whatever that is. And if it's coming from a place of fear, meaning that if you don't do it, you think that something bad is going to happen. We get so caught up in our own self and wanting to perform and be at our best that we're not looking outward. We're actually not really able to serve and be with the people that are in the room with us. And that's what I call presence. Being present is really being aware to what's going on around you, being in the room with other people, being able to shift and navigate conversations on a dime because you're reading the room and you're realizing that even though you had agenda A, agenda B might be what actually serves the topic and the people in the room most. And that's what great leaders can do is they're able to do that and navigate. However, many leaders will find themselves either chronically or seasonally get caught in performative leadership, which is when it becomes all about them and they're so focused on just getting through things and getting through that next meeting and delivering the deck or delivering the sales pitch that they're losing the essence of the magic that's happening in the moment in the room. And that's where leadership, in my mind, real leadership lives, authentic leadership lives, because that's when innovation can occur. You can shift and navigate conversations better.
You know where I see that a lot in two instances that come to mind, with one is politicians and two is business leaders like CEOs or whatever. Because a lot of times you'll start a conversation and it may start off pretty authentic and it may start off well, but then when you ask a question like, well, what do you do or what do you believe? And then you can just almost see it in their eyes where they go into this canned, response that they've said 1,000 times. And it just, you can tell immediately that it's no longer authentic. It's just, a regurgitated thing that they've said over and over and over again. And
Hmm.
what I try and get my people to look at is, yeah, go to plan B. Don't necessarily come out with the same thing every time because what's going to resonate with one group of people is not going to resonate with others. And people can see through that when it's scripted and canned.
Absolutely. And it comes across as inauthentic. The other aspect that I'd love to point out that I'm sure you can relate to in your own life, Steve, is that we evolve and change as human beings. And oftentimes those canned responses could be something they crafted 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And guess what? You've outgrown that version of yourself. So even if it was, your authentic answer 10, 20 years ago, it probably isn't anymore. And so we need to make sure that we're always checking in and giving more real, vulnerable, authentic answers because as leaders, connection is going to be more important than ever, especially now with the rise of AI, which is going to be making a lot of decisions and making a lot of our day-to-day task work go away. The one area where leaders can make a difference is humanity and authenticity and vulnerability. And so showing up in ways where it's not the answer that I think Steve wants to hear, but the answer that I think the audience needs to hear and that feels that it resonates both best with me and my heart and my body, that's the answer I'm going to give in this interview instead of what I think is the right answer.
It's so true, and people know it. People that are really good at it. I've told this story before on this podcast, but I'll tell it again because I think it's pertinent right now. Is Senator Tom Daschle, when he was Majority Leader of the Senate back in the early 2000s, I was at a fundraising event, and he was there, and I had got to know him pretty good with my advocacy work that I did for our profession. And I was at a brunch with about 12 people. And my 13-year-old daughter was there. And she went up and she's not shy. And she went up and asked him a question about something what he believed. And instead of just giving the canned answer and what we just talked about, he said, well, what do you think? What do you think? And at
Mm,
that moment in time, he made her feel like she was the most important person in the world right there. And you think of all the influences and people that he dealt with and she sensed it. And on the way home, she kept talking about it, talking about it. To this day, she's in her early 40s now. She still refers to him as my friend Tom.
oh, that's so
And
cool.
so, it's just one of those things where you can really connect with people if you don't make it about you or what you're doing and more about them and why they're asking the question and
Mm.
getting that connection. It makes a huge difference.
It makes a huge difference. And it transgresses all of leadership. So, whether you're in a boardroom or whether you're talking with a customer or you're talking with your manager or you're talking with your team or you're hiring somebody, right? Or you're talking to the media or press, the moment that you start to get curious and ask open-ended questions and you crack that frame of performance and you allow yourself to make it about more than just you, magic happens.
Yeah. I'm sure we could spend the whole podcast talking about my next question here, so maybe you could just summarize, but you have these simple frameworks that you like to work with, and you title them as your doubt is your data, failure is fuel, vulnerability is viral. So just kind of cover those a little bit and summarize what you do with those and why you think those are so important.
Yeah, I look at them as three key mindset shifts that I work on with my clients and I share in workshops. And the first is that doubt is really just data. If we really start to detach the emotion from doubt when we're feeling it, then we start to say, what is this doubt telling me? And start to look at it from a factual standpoint. You'll start to realize, like, oh, it's just telling me I don't have enough information. That's why I'm doubtful. I need to get more data on this. Or it's telling me that I don't like the way this person did these three things. So I don't know that they're going to be the best person for this role that I'm hiring for. If we really start to look at doubt and not take it personally and detach the emotion from it, we can look at it as just pure data. It's just pure information trying to help us. It's not trying to make us feel bad about ourselves.
Yeah, okay.
That's the
And
first
then
one.
Okay. And then failure is fuel.
Yeah, so failure, I look at it as just part of the journey. It's not the destination. So if we start to look at it as a step in the right direction instead of being the destination that, you know, makes us feel so bad that we stop or we lose our momentum, we can just look at it as, okay, it's actually just fuel because I get information from that failure and it gives me information on what to do next, and it's fuel for my next big idea.
Okay. And then vulnerability. We've heard that word a lot lately.
Yeah.
It's Brene Brown made it famous, let's say, and
Thanks
and
to
yet
her.
everyone agrees it's necessary, yet I still think people get uncomfortable with being vulnerable in front of groups.
Yeah. So first I'll talk to the method and then I can answer that, what, share my
Okay.
hypothesis on why I think they're uncomfortable in groups if that's of interest to you. So the reason I said vulnerability is my role is because I think we've all been in a room where, whether it's personal or in a career situation, where somebody doesn't expose, all their childhood secrets, but they share something about themselves that just opens the door a little bit so you can resonate with them. It creates a little more relatability and makes you feel a little closer to them, like the distance isn't so far between you and them in that room. And we've seen how suddenly then someone else in the room will then start to share a little bit more about themselves. And so I truly believe that vulnerability is viral. And each of us as leaders, whether you are a quote unquote a manager or you're just on a team, you can still lead. And we know that leadership is about influence. So if you lean in and you share a little bit of selective vulnerability about yourself, just like Lencioni has taught us, it's one of the fastest ways to build trust. And you
Yeah.
can start to see everyone else in the room, shoulders go down, and other people will start to share a little more about themselves. And it truly is viral.
And I think there's a fine line there too. I know that a lot of research was done in the medical field where patients would get frustrated with their physicians because they would come in and they would tell them what they're going through and be very vulnerable, obviously. And then the physician often would say, "Oh, well, that happened to me, or that's happened to me," and then they go on and talk about themselves, which isn't what the patient wants to hear. So it's like there's a fine line there where yes, empathizing with them and being vulnerable with them, but not turning it back over to all about you. It has to relate to them and what their vulnerability is so that you get that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where we can almost get into a conversation around a fine line between empathy and sympathy. Empathy is actually truly understanding where someone else is coming from and being open enough that you can put yourself in their shoes and then ask open-ended questions to truly help them problem solve and or feel heard, seen, and create that psychological safety. Sympathy is more like, oh yeah, I've been there, and then you make it about you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
So let's go back to the groups then. So if I'm speaking in front of a group, whether it's in my own company or perhaps I'm giving a keynote speech in front of a larger group or whatever, sometimes we put up walls to protect ourselves there. You don't want to go too far yet. What
Yeah.
we know is most effective is when you can be vulnerable in that setting as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So the advice I typically give to my clients is, if we can use a visual here and pardon the analogy, but it seems to resonate the most is if, you were back in World War II and you were on the battlefield and you're in the trenches, you want a leader who's in the trench with you, but you trust is going to lead you out of the trench because they've done it before, but they hopped back in to be with you because they're a leader and they're in there with you, not the guy who is on the walkie-talkie 2 miles away telling you what to do, but he has no line of sight. So that's kind of the metaphor I really like to use. So when you're in a room with people, whether it's delivering in a keynote or a one-on-one conversation, I always like to say, share a story about a challenge you had. And it doesn't have to be so deeply personal that it makes you uncomfortable, or it doesn't have to be so recent that it's going to maybe create or breed distrust with the team or the audience that you may not, be as competent or confident as you want them to think. But it could be something like, 10 years ago, I went through a reorganization, I went through a change, and it really had brought up some bad feelings for me. And here were the things I was thinking, but here's how I got through it. And I understand that some of you may be feeling that way today. Just something like that can bridge the
Sure.
gap.
And as leadership coaches, we talk to our clients and talk to the people that we work with all the time about that. Yet I would say that that's still a very uncomfortable thing for people to do.
It is.
So we look at vulnerability as a weakness, but you've actually said you think vulnerability is a strength.
I do. I think it's a superpower because I think it's something that should be used selectively, deliberately, and with precision. So, to your point earlier, Steve, it should not be used pervasively. It should not be overused or abused, I'll call it. And I think it's really important that it's a less is more strategy. So, it's about precision and where you use it and how you use it. And are you using it to serve the people in the room and the message and the impact you want to have? Or is it self-serving? Like, I just want to tell a story about myself right now. Or is it because I really think that by sharing this, it's going to ease tension in the audience or the room and create a relatable moment where they're going to realize that they're not alone and they're going to have permission to feel these things they're feeling.
When you think back on the athletic trainer that you talked about that was kind of the leading
Mm-hmm.
athletic trainer at the time, and you know, it sounds like you considered her as a mentor. What
Mm-hmm.
did you learn from her? What did you see in her that you still bring back in your day to day now, where you think, you know, I learned this from her?
Yeah. She was really great at seeing things as they really are. I was still a little bit naive and kind of saw the world with rose-colored glasses. And well, I don't think it's healthy to be like over the top negative or skeptical. I think looking at things, having high reality testing, as we call it in emotional intelligence work, is really, really important. Seeing things objectively and as they really are. And she was really good at that. And so that's one thing that I think she taught me was, wow, she saw something completely different in a situation that I saw, but we were both in the same room and saw the same thing happen. And so she was able to really open my eyes to where my own bias and my own wishful thinking might be getting in the way of what reality is. And so I
Mhm.
really work with my clients on that as well in terms of let's really step back from this situation and let's really look at the reality of what's actually happening and then how your own biases are getting in the way and filtering that.
Is she still at it? Do you have any contact with her anymore?
I have not talked to her in years, but I knew she became a professor at a school in Northern Arizona University, and I don't know if she's retired yet, but maybe
Yeah,
after this conversation, I'll reach out to her. Yeah.
yeah, that'd be great. So, what changed for you when you yourself stopped, you know, leading from what was expected of you, and you just kind of started being your authentic self? Do you remember a moment or a place in time where that actually happened, and it was your aha moment?
Yeah, so there's two. One is I feel that it was when I had my first son. I think that's just always a pivotal moment for a parent and mother. And I really started to realize that I needed to prioritize myself more. At the time, I was kind of a workaholic. And I realized, like, wow, okay, I really, like, now I have a reason, an excuse, quote unquote,
Mhm.
to prioritize myself and my family more, but that really was very liberating for me to realize less is more, implementing some of the 80-20 philosophies and rules in terms of, what are the four things that I really need to do today that are going to actually be the biggest levers of impact so that I don't have to do as much every day, but I can have as much impact and
Mhm.
not feel like I was burdened to a list of 100 things every day. So that was point number one. The second one was about a year and a half ago, I ended up catching bacterial pneumonia through a white water rafting trip. I didn't know it was that. I went to the ER. They treated it like viral pneumonia, sent me home. But about 36 hours later, I was almost dead. I was in full septic shock, respiratory failure, the
Oh
beginning
my
of
gosh.
liver failure, and they were concerned about potential heart failure because a murmur was starting to develop. Um, I had 107 temperature and was literally almost dead. And by the grace of God, I'm not. I was here, but I had many rough nights in the hospital and many conversations with what I believe is our Creator, and came out of that really realizing that a lot of the work I was still doing was still a sliver of performative work, and I wasn't really rooting myself and being present as much in my day-to-day life as I wanted to be. And if it was going to end, I wanted to feel like I could taste the moments and not leave thinking it just flew by. And so that led me, down even a deeper path of looking at how can I be more rooted in presence and how can I be more rooted in um, acknowledging the moments that I'm living and really make sure that I live my life differently and with more meaning.
I can only imagine how that makes you pretty clear what's important and what you should focus on, and
Yeah.
not everyone has that significant or tough, thing to go through that just really makes you look at things in a different way.
Yeah, and that was part of my goal for creating the podcast as well. As I came out of that, I knew known I wanted to do a podcast, but I told my husband, I said, I can't believe I almost had to die to finally realize that I'm worthy of being here. Like, this is so silly. I'm so stubborn. And I said, I'm going to launch this podcast because my goal would be that I don't want anyone to have to go through anything that extreme in order to realize that these doubts and feelings of unworthiness are part of our human experience and they're completely normal. And the more we can share and talk about them and work on strategies to normalize it and then get to the root cause and heal those wounds, the better off we'll all be.
Now, to that end, you've also created an app called Soul Star Awakening. So, was that after this experience? And tell us a little bit about what that app does and how it works and how you use it.
Yeah, so that was actually done a few years ago. And it was the intention behind it was that a lot of leaders I work with have a hard time going from, I'll call it 0 to 30. So they would feel like, look, I'm not a meditator. I have a hard time meditating. I can't just go to 15, 30 minutes of meditation. So what I started to focus on was, well, what if we could make quality more than quantity? And while there's a lot of research suggesting that minutes of how long you meditate does have an impact, I wanted to baby step them into it. And so the whole point of the app was that you could find a 20, 30-minute meditation um, using hertz frequency music to relax yourself, proven Solfeggio frequencies in order to create different feelings and healing in the body. However, if you only had 2 or 3 minutes, what would that look like? And so that people could ease into it. They could also give themselves permission to maybe go for a walk while they do it. So if they don't feel like they're at a place where they can sit still, they don't abandon that idea altogether. Walking while listening to it would be better than nothing. And so that was the whole purpose of the app.
And you walk that talk, right? I mean, you do things in mindfulness and exercise and things that you think center you more and get you back to, decreasing all the noise and the stress and trying to get to a more relaxed state so you can focus on what is important.
Absolutely. And my whole day is structured around it. I mean, it's structured around before I even get out of bed, saying thank you, thank you
Mhm.
3 times, and just being thankful for the day before I even put my feet on the ground. Thankful for breath and waking. Even if I'm tired and had a bad night of sleep, I make sure I do that before I get out of bed. I go for a walk every day with my dogs so I can be in nature and be with my animals and surrounded by unconditional love. I journal. So my whole day, I have these micro moments that I build into it, and it's really important to me. And that's one reason why I like coaching so much, Steve. Is I found that this work is so important to my own uh, growth as a human being and just being my best self each and every day, as well as just being a better mom and wife and whatnot, all these other roles that we play in our lives, that it keeps me accountable for the work. So if I wasn't a coach, I could probably slip back into the corporateness of doing all these things and rushing around. But because I'm a coach, I know accountability is important. I know that I live by certain ethics and virtues and that it's important for me to walk the walk. And so it actually keeps me accountable to doing the work. And so that's one reason I love my occupation too, is that it actually pushes me to do the work.
And the gratitude practice is pretty simple when you think about it, but yet it's so often missed, right? We just focus on the negatives and the big things and the stresses and all those things, and sometimes just stepping back and appreciating what you have and what you've done and the people in your lives and whatever. It seems pretty basic and simple, but often overlooked, I think.
It's really overlooked, and that's one thing that my near-death experience brought really forward to me for me because I was at the point where I was struggling with breathing, and even taking a full breath was something that wasn't possible because the pneumonia had spread to all five lobes of my lungs. So I had multi-lobe pneumonia. And as I was going through the breathing treatments, I realized that feeling and sensation that I couldn't even breathe into all my lungs. And the gratitude for when I started to be able to feel that full feeling. And it just was like, wow, we take this for granted each and every day. And without breath, I have nothing. Literally, without breath, I'm not even here. And so I started to really recognize how, as human beings, I understand how we take that for granted because we're breathing, even as we're talking right now, but how grateful we should be for each and every breath.
And that just resonated with me right now. Unfortunately, I lost a dear friend just in the last 5 weeks or so that had a pulmonary
Mhm.
disease, and I just saw that it must be such torture to not be able to breathe or not be feel like you can't breathe. I mean, if anything, of course, there's pain and there's misery and there's all other kinds of things that are destructive as well, but just the basic ability to not breathe has just got to be so tough, and you experienced it.
Yeah, I don't remember a lot about some of those moments because my oxygen levels got low enough that I
Hmm.
think, protective mechanisms or whatever, it just kind of blocked it out. But yeah, I definitely came out of that a different person. And to your point, I think the gratitude practice is really easy to overlook. One shift that I've made since my experience and that I work with my clients on is even the simple practice of the moment that you feel upset about something, enraged, angered, frustrated, annoyed, whatever the word is, feel that feeling, acknowledge it, don't try to stuff it down, and then immediately ask, what is the gift in this? What is this trying to show me? Because I guarantee if you ask that question, there is something to be grateful for in that. And usually it's trying to show you something that you either need to attend to that you're not and you're ignoring, or maybe some new, you know, bit of data or information that would be useful for you.
I've also heard you say that, how do you reduce the size of your amygdala? So,
Mm,
let's talk about that a little bit because again, that's kind of back to the fight or flight response versus, more of the parasympathetic nervous system, response. So tell us a little bit about, why that's important and how do you do that?
yeah. Well, it's important because the bigger it's like any other like a muscle, right? The bigger it gets, the more active it gets, the more it's going to hijack the rest of your brain, which is where your creativity, innovation, um, ideas, thoughts occur. The amygdala is really just an emotional brain. It really doesn't have any words. It just has emotion. And that's why when it hijacks the brain, people will sometimes, unfortunately, get overwhelmed and do crazy or awful things to themselves or others because they literally just are over overrun by their emotions. They really can't put words or thoughts or rational thinking to it. So some of the best ways that I've found and researched on is obviously meditation is a great one. Getting out into nature, anything that's grounding, anything that brings you back to a sense of rootedness. Obviously, going out and grounding. If you want to take your shoes off and stepping soil or on grass or just earth is a big one. Another great activity is anything creative. So I often will keep a dot to dot book for it's a dot to dot book for adults, but I will keep it near my desk. So when I have moments of anxiety, fear, frustration, whatever, if I pull it out and you just start connecting the dots, it actually forces you to move out of your amygdala into the creative part of your brain, and it'll start to calm it. But by doing things like dot to dots or drawing, sketching, anything creative, painting, writing, journaling, meditation, anything that basically takes you out of a fear-based state will help to over time reduce the size of the amygdala.
I talked to somebody recently who has a theory that the best CEOs have that outlet, or, best leaders, high-powered leaders have an outlet. For some, it's exercise. Maybe they're runners or cyclists
Mhm.
or whatever. Others use music. Maybe they play music or they do something, or there's the mindfulness practices, so on. But the best have some outlet, like you say, because sometimes you just need to decompress and kind of, switch your brain to the other side, get it more to, get it out of the left brain and into the right brain so that you can,
Mhm.
kind of calm down and reset where you're at and go forward. And I think that's probably true.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, as an emotional intelligence advisor as well, I really believe that it's about self-regulation. And these things allow us to self-regulate and create harmony within our own body. And then we can make better decisions and we can show up more emotionally regulated in our decision, not only in our decision making, but in relationships and in communications and all sorts of things. And it impacts your stress tolerance and whatnot. So I really do think that it's about addressing our own internal signals and learning our own internal signals and learning what is going to help you self-regulate most. So is it music? Is it walking? Is it all of the above?
When I was the CEO, I had a Stairmaster in my office. And so I'd try and get on that, at least a few times a week, every day if possible. And I learned quickly that I needed a notepad and a pen on the top of the Stairmaster. Because as soon as I got into the exercise, as soon as I started really going at it, I would have these great ideas, and if I waited till I got off the Stairmaster, sometimes I'd forget about it. So I think, again, it's just an example of how your brain shifts in a different way, and now all of a sudden it's open to new ideas and curiosity and things that can help you think of things in a different way, as opposed to the pressure of maybe the day to day.
I love that. And absolutely, I've noticed the same when I walk, I get all my good ideas. So I didn't, I'll just use the voice memo or recorder just to capture
Mhm.
things as I'm on the move because I don't want to stop my walk, but I also want to capture ideas because sometimes I'm like, that's going to go away if I don't capture it right now. So I think, there's a lot, and you probably know more about this than anyone else with your background, but I think there's a lot to be said between, moving the body right brain, left brain, right, right side of the body, left side of the body, and how that can often help us move through with creativity, ideas, and even process old stuck emotions.
And you see that sometimes it's intentional, but sometimes it just happens where, let's say you're in a negotiation and it's not getting anywhere. What happens? A lot of times the person who stands up and moves to the other part of the room, or maybe walks around a little bit or whatever, can sometimes unlock that stuff. And again, like you say, it's just movement. It's shifting something in a different way. It gets you out of the lock that you're in, whatever that is. And sometimes that's all it takes is a little movement. Sometimes you can do it, like I said, intentionally. And it's funny if you
Yeah.
see it, if people, are good at that, a lot of times they'll get up, and start, and then the other person will get up and start walking around too, because they're
Yeah.
thinking, what's he doing? What's he doing? So, but, maybe that breaks the dam.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about the physicality aspect of it, but that makes so much more sense, and I see it all the time. Yeah.
So another thing I think that's real important too is, how can leaders prioritize, the small actions that make the most significant
Yeah.
impacts? Because a lot of times, again, in leadership roles, we think it's got to be the big things and we got a big plan and the big, strategies and whatever. But a lot of times it's just the more simpler day-to-day things that you intentionally do that built up over time can make the most significant changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a baseline for that, oftentimes I'll start somewhere very basic and simple, but it'll be like looking at the Eisenhower matrix, right? And it's a lot of leaders, it's amazing, have never used it or they haven't used it in 20 years and they haven't had a chance to actually reassess, like, okay, how are my priorities today different than when I did this 20 years ago? And so, for those that aren't familiar, we can definitely put a link, but it's really just a matrix with four boxes. It's, what is urgent and has to be done by you, what is urgent but can be delegated, right? What is not really urgent but can be done by you, and what can just be like maybe not done altogether, like what needs to just get
Mhm.
off. off your table, off your plate, and maybe off the team's plate, so it's not in the delegate category. And you'll be surprised how many things actually can fall, how little things can fall into the urgent category. And if you start to see too much there, then it's an opportunity, obviously, for us as coaches and for someone as a leader to really look at, okay, why am I not delegating? Let's start looking at the reasons. Okay, maybe I don't trust this person, or maybe I don't think that they're um, going to do it the way I want to do it. So where's there an upskilling opportunity? Where is there maybe a relationship building opportunity so we can build more trust between each other? You start to find the cracks in the foundation,
Mhm.
and then you'll start to realize, like, okay, there's really only these three things I have to do. So that's one place we can start for people who are a little more pragmatic, practical, and want something visually. For those that are a little bit more working on data, but also use their gut in a lot of decisions, I will find that I oftentimes just will encourage leaders to really trust their gut. And I know it's something that a lot of leaders don't like to just come out and say, like, oh, I trusted my gut on this decision. But we know the research. We know the gut is the second brain. We know the research on how the gut works with the brain. And so I will often ask leaders to just take a deep breath, write down everything, and trust their gut. And if you could only do three things today, what would they be? And just challenge them with that. And then say, okay, what would happen if you did these three things and didn't do these other things? What's the worst case scenario? And oftentimes it's not getting fired, or these things that they tell themselves in stories. And so I will often challenge them just to experiment for one day, and they'll do it. And they're often surprised at, like, wow, I did this one thing and I didn't realize the other 10 things would go off my list because I didn't realize the domino effect of that one thing. So it's kind of a Tim Ferriss rule, but I find it
Yeah.
really helps serve people to look at
Well,
what's
I think
most
one of the
impactful.
myths that we sometimes have as leaders is that, we got to be busy, 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 doing all this kind of stuff, and if we're not, we're somehow not, reaching our potential or not working hard enough or whatever. When I think a real reality to me was when someone said, the best CEOs really aren't that busy. And
Right.
if you think about it, that's like, what? But
Mm-hmm.
it's true because if you know how to delegate and you focus on the right things and you're not running around with your hair on fire all the time. And I think that statement is kind of true. But I think especially in Western culture, we get this idea that if I'm not, working, 14 hours a day and run around like crazy person, then I must not be doing my job well enough.
I think there's a lot of shame and a lot of guilt in our culture with that, for sure. And I'd love your thoughts on this, but one thing that I've been telling my clients recently, and that I personally believe, which I'm sure will get a lot of frowns in the corporate world, but I think it's true, is that at the end of the day, they're not paying you for 40 hours a week. They're paying you for impact, right? But they're not paying you for 40 hours a week. And so as individuals, it's up to us to show up as our best self. And I think that's what they're paying you for. They're paying you to have the discernment to be able to show up as your best self so that you can make the impact that you need to make, whether that's 30 hours one week, 25 hours one week, 40 hours one week, 50 hours one week, whatever that looks like. But at the end of the day, I believe they're paying you to show up as your best version of yourself. So if that means that you need to go out and take an hour walk every day for lunch so that you can come back to that meeting with better decision making, then I believe that you should not feel guilty about taking that hour walk.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on. And it's just one of those things that culturally is hard to do. I mean, there's
Yeah.
some progressive companies that have a nap room. I mean,
Yeah.
and take a nap in the middle of the day to kind of clear your mind or whatever. Most people say, geez, what a lazy person that guy is. He's not whatever, but that may be the formula that really then stimulates those great ideas for the rest of the day that do much better than just powering through and doing it half, exhausted or not clear in your head.
That's right. And we know that these back to back to back meeting schedules don't work, and that after a certain number of hours, we just all tap out. And we may be able to hide it really well, but we're all human and we tap out at some point.
For
So,
sure. And then, we talked earlier about how vulnerability, that word has gained a lot of credit and people are starting to understand it and embrace it. Another word that I think is coming along too is curiosity and
mm,
how, if we're curious, it's just, it's a whole different thing than acting like you know it all. And and here's how we have to do things, but being curious about what others bring to the table and what could be, and having discussions like that are often the most fruitful.
I agree. And back to your earlier comment about I believe as a senator, the I think curiosity is a form of vulnerability because he knew the answer, but he asked your daughter, "What do you think?" And
Yeah.
that's vulnerability because somebody could turn and say, "Oh, well, he didn't know the answer, so he asked the 12-year-old or whatever the story is," and that's not true. Curiosity. Some of the best leaders know the answer and have a strong opinion on something, but they ask the room, what am I missing? What do you think? Or I feel like this is right, but I'm almost too sure. What are you seeing that I'm not? And those are some of the best leaders.
We talked about this a little earlier, but I'm also intrigued by in a coaching service, and you coach a lot of people, as do I. And do you think that you can coach somebody and teach somebody how to get out of that making decisions, or going forward out of fear and anger versus approaching everything from a love and joy aspect?
Mm. Been one of my life lessons. I do. I think, but I think it's a lot like AA work. They have to be willing to acknowledge that there's a problem in the first place. And so I think you can coach them and shine the light and illuminate that, like, look, I'm really hearing this is coming from fear. I think that's something to look at. But all you can do is lead the horse to water so many times. They have to be willing to take a drink and be like, okay, I'm maybe not sold, but I'm willing to play in this territory for a little bit. Or, you know what? I think you're right. I'm not acknowledging it. I'm willing to acknowledge it. I think as coaches, it's our job to guide. We can't do the work for them. And that's what I tell clients all the time is I can promise that you will get results, but I can't promise that you're going to do the work. And they have to be willing and open, and being willing to be open, which is where that vulnerability piece comes in, to not be perfect and to give themselves permission to not know it all, and to realize that, okay, wait, maybe this is more driven from fear than I thought. I mean, even myself, someone that's been in the work for a long time, continually finds things that I feel like I approach things from love a lot. But every now and again, I find something where I'm like, oh, that's really fear based, Kendra. There's an opportunity
Yeah.
here. So it's something that we all have. And I do think I think it's coachable. I think it takes a very strong coach, and I think it takes a very strong leader and a certain level of willingness and um, curiosity for somebody to actually be walked through that rite of passage.
And
What do
that's
you
not
think?
easy. It sounds easy when we just talk about it, but it's not easy. And I'm sure you've probably done this too, or I've lost a client or two by kind of pushing them down that path, and then
Yeah,
their fear anger comes out and says, "Okay, I'm done," and they don't want
right.
to hear it anymore. And so you lose your connection with that person. But I still think you got to try, because you're right. It's transformational. When you can look at it that way, the mindset just changes, and all of a sudden, not only do you become a better leader and you resonate more with your people, but I think you take the stress and craziness off your shoulders a little bit too, which is helpful for you personally as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing that because I've gotten into challenges with clients over that too. I've almost lost a client over it. At one point, I rejected a renewal with a client because I realized that it was coming from a place of fear, and I didn't feel like I was the best coach for that. And I tried to explain that, but they were very offended by it, and we still don't talk today. I
Yeah.
send them nothing but gratitude and my best. But I really felt like what was going to serve them the most was me extracting myself from that situation and referring them to go work with someone else. But it's not an easy one. I think whenever you're in a service role, there's we can put ourselves in a position where we can fall into the hero or the trader complex, and I find that sometimes clients or potential clients can put us sort of on that spectrum sometimes, like either over hero us or put us into sort of like a trader or betrayal category, which isn't exactly true either.
Yeah. In doing some research for this, I also found something that you had said that, you focus on making your clients the hero and
Mm,
not the coaching. And
mm.
so describe what you're saying with that. What do you mean by that?
I think it's our role as a coach, and this is where it can get, we can have a lot of conversation around this, but around to remove judgment. Um, and of course, I have to believe from, I'm an ICF certified coach, so I think if we find ourselves in an ethically, um, binding situation or a situation where we don't feel like we can be bias free, because, for instance, like um, let's say you had some life experience, so you have a very strong opinion about something, and then the client's going through that life experience, and so you don't feel like you can actually coach them without judgment. I think it's our job to say that and remove ourselves from that situation. However, I think day to day, it's important for us to show up without judgment and just really deeply listen and understand where they're coming from as a human being, and understand that there's got to be good reason for why they're doing what they're doing behind it, and just help them navigate their next best choice, not your next best choice. So just because you would do something different than what they're doing doesn't always mean that that's what is the best next choice for them in their current situation. And so again, we're guides. We're not there to make decisions for them. We're there to help guide them to make their next decision. And I think a lot of people look to coaches as consultants, advisors, which we can wear multiple hats, so that can get kind of confusing. But I think it's really important for us as coaches to understand that difference, and when to put on our consultant and advisor hat, and when to put on the coach hat.
And I've always loved the line, and I use it a lot, and I still use it today, is there's more than one right answer. The way
That's
that
right.
I might do it and get through it could be different than the way you do it, but we get to the same place by going in a
Mhm.
different, another analogy would be it's a crooked path to get there. It's not a straight line. So I think we have to be open to that, that there's different ways to get there for sure.
Yeah, and I think championing your client, and then also, there's a lot of power when they've come to a decision based on their own self and internal wisdom or wherever they're getting it from, versus you telling them, "Oh, I think you should do this." They're going to feel way more empowered, and so that's another element of making them the hero.
For sure. So I don't want to leave without asking you too about your volunteer work to support postgraduate women leaders. So what are you doing with that?
Yeah. So I'm currently doing some work with the University of Tennessee, and I'm part of the Women's Leadership Board there. So doing some work to help mentor and support people who are at the University of Tennessee in postgraduate programs, in particular women.
Yeah, that's great. So, in anticipation of our discussion today, what haven't I asked you or what haven't we covered that you want to be sure and get in the show today?
I think we've covered a lot of it. I think there's a whole aspect that could probably be an entirely new conversation, Steve, on AI and how I believe it's going to change the landscape of reskilling and upskilling leaders and us as humans, and opportunity. I don't want to look at so much as a fear-based, oh gosh, what's happening? People are losing jobs. But let's look at it as an opportunity, and what it means for us as humans and leaders, and how we can behave differently, and how we can take advantage of this moment in time. So we'd
Yeah,
love to either come back, or
sure.
we can talk about that through email, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, well, what I hope happens, and I look at it from an optimistic point of view, in the sense that we just talked about how you can get mired in too much detail and doing too many things and whatever. So if there's a tool that could take away a lot of those things that don't take your creative, curious, emotionally intelligent self to do, and get that done in a different way that gives you more time to do the human connection piece with your team and your clients and your customers, to me, that would be a real positive. So,
Mhm.
hopefully we can steer it in that direction. And I agree. I don't think it's going to take over the world. And yes, it may eliminate some jobs, but I think it's going to create a lot more jobs too, and hopefully more jobs that are more meaningful to people than just tasks and checking off boxes.
Completely agree. And I think we, again, I think the I have a strong opinion on this, but I think the more proper way to use AI is as a thought partner and less as like
Yeah.
a decision making and force. And so I think if we as leaders start to look at it as a thought partner, it can accelerate our own pattern recognition, decision making, thoughts, ideas, innovation. And then we can have more time to do strategy, which we know is what leaders need more time to do, to your point, and leave the tactical stuff to the AI.
Well, we can probably agree that there's no AI machine that has a gut. So
No, not
it's
yet.
not going to make any gut decisions, right? So
That's right, not yet. And I
yeah,
think that's why it's so important that we have humans calibrating it.
yeah. So at this point in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question, and that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
Wow, that's a good one. I think I would say don't ever sacrifice your vitality. Don't ever put your personal well being and wellness second, because without it, there is nothing else.
Yeah. And that's speaking from truth to what you went through.
Directly
And
from the hospital
you
bed.
know, it
Yes.
I'm sure it opened your eyes and was like, gosh, what is important? So
Yeah,
it's too bad you had to go through that, but at least you can share it with the rest of us
been a
that
blessing.
this
It's
is
really been a
important.
blessing.
Yeah. Well, Kendra, thanks for your time today. It's been a real pleasure. It sounds like you're doing great things and you have a real passion for it. And isn't that what we all wish we would do? So, congratulations on what you're going forward with, and have uh, hope we can maybe meet down the road one of these days.
I would love that, Steve. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Okay, take care.
Thanks.
Bye bye now. Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orange, the word, .coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.